Good morning to one and all present here. Today, we have gathered here for REVA Business School Distinguished Lecture Series. REVA Business School is established with a long-term vision of educate and empower next generation managers and leaders to build sustainable business which will not only enable them in achieving operational excellence but also explore new idea models. REVA B School aims at consciously putting an effort in restructuring and redesigning the curriculum that would emphasize more on new techniques and learning pedagogies, which will provide a holistic education by integrating the knowledge received from various courses and specializations. REVA Business School Distinguished Lecture Series is a predominant practice that we at REVA Business School are very proud of. It is a platform where great minds of the society and young minds of the society come together and learn about various things in a different way. Today is our 11th Distinguished Lecture Series, where I am privileged to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Venkat Iyer. Welcome, sir. My heartiest welcome to our Honorable Chancellor, sir, Dr. P. Shamaraju. Welcome, sir. I extend my welcome to all the faculty members and my fellow friends for today's event. Welcome you all. Ethics is not knowing the Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is the right thing to do. Topic for today's session is importance of nurturing credible administration on the pillars of ethics and legality. Before starting off, let's have a brief introduction about our guest. Dr. Iyer is a barrister and academic based in Northern Ireland. He is attached to the School of Law at Ulster University, where, in addition to being Director of Educational Partnership and International Affairs, he teaches media law, constitutional law, and business law. Dr. Iyer has been in legal practice since 1981, and he is, among other things, a trained mediator. Between 2008-2015, Dr. Iyer served as Law Commissioner for Northern Ireland, a former Nuffield Press Fellow at Cambridge University. Dr. Iyer has lectured in a number of foreign universities, including Meiji University, Japan, University of Melbourne, Australia, Tsinghua University, China, Fordham University, USA, University of Malaya, International Islamic University of Malaysia, University of Bombay, India, and continues to be a visiting professor in several institutions. He has also acted as a consultant to a number of government, private corporations, and non-governmental organizations. In 2003-2004, and again in 2012, he was invited by the Royal Government of Bhutan to advise on and draft media laws for the kingdom. In 2007, he was appointed as a consultant by the World Bank to design a program on continuing legal education for the Kenya bar. Dr. Iyer runs training courses on media law and media ethics for numerous newspapers and media organizations around the world. He has also been engaged in designing and delivering capacity building programs for judges and magistrates in various jurisdictions, and frequently runs judicial training programs. It is our pleasure and honor to have such an eminent personality in our campus today. Now, I request our Chancellor Sir and Dean Ma'am Dr. Shubha A. to accompany our guest for the felicitation. let's not wait anymore and hear the thoughts of our speaker on the topic Importance of Nurturing Credible Administration on the Pillars of Ethics and Legality. Over to you, sir.
First of all, may I wish you all a very good morning. I am absolutely delighted to see so many of you. It is particularly gratifying that you all chose to attend in such large numbers on a work day or a weekday morning. I'm sure you have your normal courses to attend and other chores to deal with, but the fact that you took the time is gratifying. I also want to express my very deep sense of appreciation and gratitude to REVA University for having invited me to speak here. I've had the good fortune of speaking at many universities, but I do consider it a significant honor to have been asked to come here. I was very pleased to meet your Chancellor, Dr. Raju, and also interact with one or two of your academic leaders. For the last 3 or 4 weeks, Raghavendra Shetty has been in touch with me and he persuaded me to come and deliver this lecture. I am in Bangalore on another assignment, but I was determined to take some time out to be here with you, and so here I am. I have to say that the topic that has been assigned to me for this lecture is not something which is directly in my area of specialization. As you may have gained from the very kind introduction that was made of me, I am essentially a lawyer. But I do, of course, speak to non-legal audiences from time to time. And so I took it up almost as a challenge to address you on this rather interesting topic about the importance of nurturing credible administration on the pillars of ethics and integrity. I hope I don't disappoint you. I cannot be sure that I will be meeting your expectations, but I'll do my best. That is what I would say by way of prefatory remarks. Now, the topic itself is not entirely new to me because I have been doing many lectures and training courses on media ethics. And I also include ethics as a fairly big component of the training programs I do for judges all over the world. In particular, in the Commonwealth. I've been very closely connected with the Commonwealth. And I edit 2 journals, one of which is the Commonwealth Lawyer, and the other is the Round Table, the Commonwealth Journal of International Affairs. So in both those capacities, as well as in others, I deal frequently with ethics. And I firmly believe that ethics are just as important as law. Particularly when you talk about media ethics, it is impossible to regulate the media without an emphasis on ethics. So, as I said, I'll do my best in terms of doing justice to this topic that's been assigned to me. I need hardly tell you about how important ethics are in the area of administration, whether it's public administration or private administration. And of course, integrity is very much a part of that general mix, which would be relevant to any walk of life, not just administration, to any activity and to any profession. So that's why we talk about professional ethics, which could be in law, medicine, anywhere. And so integrity and ethics go together. And sadly, in many parts of the world, there has been a perceptible decline in ethical behavior. And this, of course, has been a cause of major concern, as I'm sure you must have read and heard about. Now, this trend has had tangible and sometimes dramatic consequences in terms, for example, of increasing corruption, loss of public confidence in institutions, erosion of democratic values, and so on. Not to mention, of course, sharp drops in the quality of services rendered by both public and private institutions. Now, I suppose it is in order for me to look at what exactly does the term ethics mean. In very general terms, of course, ethics concerns itself with what is morally good or morally bad, or if you want to use different terminology, between right and wrong. It comprises rules or norms of conduct which are applicable to human actions and is usually associated with the conduct of particular groups or cultures or with particular professions or activities. Ethics are intimately connected with morality. But it is possible, I would say, to draw a distinction between the two. In the words of one authority, morals usually connote an element of subjective preference, while ethics tend to suggest aspects of universal fairness and the question of whether or not an action is responsible. I might give you an example, a somewhat light-hearted example from my part of the world, where some years ago there was this incident where a lady who used to run what the British delicately call a disorderly house. Actually, it is an euphemism for something much worse. And she was asked by the media to provide the names of her clients, some of whom were very famous. These clients included judges, politicians, etc., frequenting her disorderly house. And she said something interesting. She was not a very educated person, but she was quite sensible. And she said, in her own Cockney way, me morality may be low, but me ethics are high. So in other words, she was saying, ethically, I cannot give out the names of my clients. But of course, I'm doing something quite immoral. So you can see the difference that is being drawn out between ethics and morality. Now, not surprisingly, ethics are frequently associated with religions. But that connection is by no means inevitable. One can be ethical while being an atheist. And most religions, of course, emphasize the need for ethical conduct. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that point, but just to say that it is in the nature of ethics to have two dimensions. One is subjective, and that deals with one's own conscience. And the other is slightly more objective, and that means the standards that are expected by society. So you can look at it from both inside and outside. And of course, when you talk about ethics, you bring in concepts such as good and evil, virtue and vice, justice and injustice. And sometimes ethics are treated as, if you like, the science of ideal human character. There is a lot of literature on the relationship between ethics and morality, ethics and law, ethics and religion, etc., which, of course, you may be familiar with. And at a practical level, ethics have been getting more and more formal recognition. and this is happening all over the world. For example, in the formulation of government policy, you would have ethical dimensions to government policies on, say, abortion, euthanasia, animal rights, etc., but also in the private sector. So you'd have business ethics, you'd have bioethics, you'd have media ethics, and so on. Now that brings me to an important question, which is, can ethics be taught? And there are conflicting viewpoints on this particular topic. One school of thought believes that ethics can only come from within. You cannot teach ethics. It has to come from a person's own conscience. But there's another school of thought which says that it is possible to teach ethics. And that is why many institutions, including universities, do have courses on ethics. Ethics teaching has now become an almost integral part of various formal courses of education. So whether it's a law or medicine or any other discipline. Now, I'm turning slightly into specifics of ethics and integrity, and I want to start with just a brief word or two about public sector ethics. You could think of that as a core values and behavioral standards that are expected of state functionaries, both in the bureaucracy, that is the civil service, and in elected public office, which is the domain of politicians. They comprise morals or values which are seen as universal in terms of fairness and which serve the public interest. The concept of public interest becomes very important when you're talking about ethics, or when you're talking more generally about the goals of public administration. And ethics are essential because they underpin the moral authority to govern. Once those running public institutions lose sight of these values and allow self-interest to gain dominance, then it would set the stage for corruption and other undesirable practices. Now, why do ethics matter in public service? Now, I suppose you would agree that an essential end goal of public service is the advancement of the public good. And this cannot be achieved, I would suggest, in an integrity-free environment. It is natural among human beings to act on subjective conceptions of morality, which may sometimes be different from universal ethical norms that are prized by many societies. In such circumstances, ethics can serve as a link or as a bridge between the various conceptions of morality that are floating around. It is a reality of modern life, which is frequently commented upon, that trust in public services is diminishing in many countries. A major reason for this is that public officials and organizations are not giving ethics the attention that it deserves. If you think about goals, values, and obligations, then unlike private organizations, and I'm talking here essentially about corporations, about companies, which are designed largely to serve private interests, the legitimacy of public organizations depends on the trust of citizens who finance public services through their taxes. To win this trust, public service needs to be responsive to the needs of those citizens. Public service organizations also need to be fair, reasonable, and transparent in the way they carry out their day-to-day operations. They, of course, also have to function lawfully. There's only so far that the law will go in ensuring accountability, fairness, etc. Much more depends on acting ethically. A very good phrase that was used by one of my gurus in India, a man called Nani Palkhiwala, was he called ethics obedience to the unenforceable. I think that's a very nice way of putting it. It means that unlike the law, ethics would not have very strong sanctions or coercive sanctions. At the same time, people have to obey the norms of ethics. So when those running organizations act ethically, citizens will have a higher regard for public service delivery mechanisms and will be more disposed to follow the law instead of looking for shortcuts. In the long run, this will also cut enforcement and policing costs for the state and lead to a more harmonious society. There is an expectation that those in public service will act with high levels of professionalism and with due transparency, that they will show a genuine commitment in word as well as deed to the public good and constantly keep in mind the need for accountability. It's been said that at the very least, there are three essential obligations of public servants, namely to follow the law, to use public resources in an effective manner, and to act ethically. These are non-negotiable. Public integrity management is a complex process which uses both external rule-based incentives and internal value-based incentives. And together, they have the potential to motivate people. Now, if you're talking in terms of key mechanisms or tools in this area, then although the human factor is important in achieving the goals that I've outlined just in the last few minutes, one cannot underestimate the role that mechanisms play in the process. And I would suggest that a very important mechanism is codes of ethics, with which you're probably familiar. Other instruments which can foster an ethical culture in organizations would include a requirement to take an oath. Why is it that holders of public office are required to take an oath before they assume responsibilities? Also, training at induction and subsequent stages, frequent and regular discussions, policy workshops, and continuing legal programs. In my own profession, we have something called CLE, continuing legal education, which all lawyers have to undergo, without which their practicing certificates or their licenses to practice will not be renewed annually. Now, there is an interesting question that is frequently asked, which is, how far can ethical codes go? And my short answer to that question is only up to a point. By their very nature, they do not have the force of law, and hence they lack strong coercive sanctions. If you break the law, there is a very good chance that you will be subject to strong coercive sanctions. But if you break a code of ethics, the sanctions are not that severe. Also, codes of ethics, by their very nature, are intended to be guidance and cannot therefore be highly prescriptive. That's why when you see a code of ethics, you'll find that the code is usually quite short, unlike laws, which are quite long and elaborate. Now, given the somewhat malleable or adaptable nature of ethical norms, there is always room for divergence in their application. There may be a range of responses possible using the same ethical norm, depending on the circumstances confronting a judge or a decision maker, and all of those responses may be reasonable, but you'll have to look at the context about specific application. Many ethical codes make a distinction between full-time salaried judges or other professionals and part-time personnel, imposing more onerous restraints on those who are full-time and less onerous requirements on those who are part-time. Cultural or other traditions may also dictate the extent of the restraints imposed by a code of ethics. And this explains national variations in relation to such codes. So you'll see that there are some countries where codes of ethics are taken more seriously than other countries, and that may have to do with cultural factors. Now, how can you make codes of ethics more effective? I would say, first of all, through impartial commissions or oversight agencies. There was a study by the OECD some years ago which suggested that it would be desirable to establish within the codes impartial public ethics bodies to administer the code and to provide guidance to public officials. Actually, there is in Indian life an equivalent of such bodies, and that is called the Lokpal, with which you probably are familiar. But I don't think that the Lokpal institution, has actually lived up to the expectations people have had. Therefore, there has been a little bit of cynicism over that particular institution. I'm talking about the institution of Lokpal. But it doesn't matter what these oversight mechanisms are called. The important thing is that they should not allow for capture by vested political interests. Now, one of the key requirements for the efficacy of such agencies, I'm talking here about the oversight or monitoring agencies, is that they should be adequately resourced and sufficiently empowered to properly audit the various risks to the integrity of public processes. Those processes include tendering, financial management, use of human and other resources, and so on. It is also important that the regime under which a code of ethics allows for a consultative approach is operated properly among all stakeholders. That would be the essence of participatory democracy. Among those involved should be the officials, the end users of the public service in question, and I would suggest also society at large. And of course, there is a need to ensure full support for those involved in oversight of the ethics mechanism, by whatever name that mechanism may be called, from the highest level of government, or if it's the private sector, then from the highest level of management. It is only this which will allow people and organizations tasked with monitoring and enforcement that they are free to carry out their jobs without fear of interference or obstruction from outside. Sometimes a code of ethics may have to be embedded into a wider regime of integrity management, and this should span the entire organization. Regard should be had to other mechanisms of transparency and accountability, such as anti-corruption measures, right to information, extremely important, whistleblower protection systems, which are not given the attention that they deserve, and so on. Attention should also be paid to ethics training at frequent intervals, and then the system of declaration of assets, as well as declarations of potential conflicts of interest, and more broadly, a commitment to utmost openness. Now, as a lawyer, I would also add that when an organization, whether it is in the public sector or the private sector, but particularly in the private sector, is drawing up a code of conduct, it should ensure that there is no conflict with or disconnect between the proposed code and existing law. If that happens, it can lead to disaster. Identifying administrative bodies responsible for implementation is also quite important. The officials and the employees at all levels must be at all times quite conversant with a code's provisions, including updates, and if they fail to do so, they will struggle to make the code effective. This requires targeted dissemination as well as frequent training from both in-house and external resource persons, so that you avoid any of the codes becoming a mere tick box exercise, which unfortunately happens a lot of the time. Now, in terms of overall importance of ethics in administration, at a macro level, what are the purposes which ethics in administration serve? I would suggest the following without being by any means exhaustive. First of all, to check capricious or arbitrary actions on the part of officials. Secondly, to promote a sense of responsibility across the workforce. Thirdly, in public services, to establish and promote good relations between the citizen and government. More generally, also to preserve and promote social well being, the public interest, and the common good. Now, there is much to be said about the public interest. I don't have the time to go deep into this, but in another context, I've always said, this particularly in the area of media, that simply because something is interesting to the public does not make it a matter of public interest. It is a principle which is worth keeping in mind. To control the exercise of administrative power and discretion is another objective, which cannot be controlled by formal laws, methods, or procedures. Yet another objective would be to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of administration, also to strengthen the legitimacy and the credibility of the administration. A couple of other purposes which are relevant would be to inculcate and maintain a high level of morale amongst everyone in the workforce. Morale is very important, and also to root out corruption, which is an ever-present danger in many societies, particularly developing societies. Now, I would venture to offer an indicative list, an indicative checklist of the qualities that are needed for those in positions of leadership to promote ethics and integrity, whether it's in the public sector or private sector. And I will just give you a short list of such qualities, starting with, of course, integrity itself, which includes utmost honesty and the capacity not to use one's power, position, discretion, etc., to serve their personal interest or other extraneous interests. A second quality I would suggest is the quality that makes you strive for excellence. And this is to ensure the highest standards of quality in administrative decisions and action. No compromise should be allowed with standards on grounds of convenience or expediency. What I have in mind, if I may put it colloquially, is the tendency sometimes adopted in India which says, chalta hai, the chalta hai attitude, which militates very strongly against this concept of striving for excellence. Then, of course, I would say impartiality or neutrality is another very essential quality for those in leadership. This requires the administrator to always act unbendingly according to the merits of each case and to refrain from expressing opinions or taking positions or initiating actions which show a bias or even a perception of bias towards or against anyone or any program. Another quality I would say is dedication to service, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. And this includes the setting of goals which serve either a national or an organizational purpose. Together with this would go devotion to duty. Administrators should work with involvement, intelligence, and commitment. It could even include such relatively mundane, but to my mind, very important matters like punctuality and fulfillment of promises made. I would suggests that here cultural attitudes play a big role. So if you look at Japanese society, you'll see how important they consider punctuality to be. And I'm sorry to say that one or two other societies, which I shall not name, are not half as keen about matters like punctuality. Overall, all these things go together in the name of good governance. Yet another quality that is needed is transparency, which means you apply all decisions and their implementation with a degree of openness, so that those affected are able to understand the reasons and the impulses behind those decisions. One more quality is responsibility, which goes with accountability. And this includes a willingness on the part of all administrators to accept responsibility for their decisions and for their actions, both legal and moral. Also, this includes a willingness to be held accountable to higher authorities, and ultimately, in the case of public servants, to the people who are the end beneficiaries of the administrator's decisions and actions. Then there's a quality of responsiveness and resilience, and this would be to deal effectively with the demands and the challenges from both external and internal influences. Just a couple of other qualities which I think are desirable. I would say compassion. Wherever possible, it is good, while staying within the rules, to demonstrate compassion towards deserving parties, regardless of their backgrounds or other attributes. This, of course, involves a very careful use of discretion in decision making. To some extent, that is encompassed by the quality of equity, which is fairness. So that also would be a necessary attribute or a necessary quality, a commitment to justice and fair play. It involves being aware at all times of the principles of equality, equity, fairness, objectivity, etc., and applying those principles to all decisions and actions. Now, of course, with equality, you have to be careful, because there is a tendency for equality to clash with liberty, with freedom. Again, for lack of time, I'm not going to go deep into this, but if you apply equality mindlessly and without having regard to the context, you might end up destroying valuable freedoms. And this, of course, comes up in certain very sensitive areas like the reservations policy and so on. So one needs to be careful when one deals with equality. There is the other possible quality that one seeks in leaders, and that is the fidelity to the goal of utilitarian principles. Administrators should constantly strive to make and implement policies and decisions which ensure that they lead to the greatest good of the greatest number of people. Then, of course, it goes without saying that administrators should also be concerned with the national interest. And this includes an awareness of the impact that policies and decisions would have on national strength and prestige, which, of course, if you're talking about the private sector, would mean the reputation and prestige of the company. Now, in the UK, we have something called the Nolan Principles of Public Life. And this came about a few years ago when the then government constituted a committee under Lord Nolan, who was asked to make recommendations about improving the quality of public life. And he came up with 7 principles, and I will very quickly go through the list. The first of which is selflessness. Holders of public office should act solely in terms of the public interest. they should not do so in order to gain financial or other benefits for themselves, their family, or their friends. The second quality he identified was integrity. And he said that holders of public office should not place themselves under any financial or other obligation to outside individuals or organizations that might seek to influence them in the performance of their official duties. A third quality that Lord Nolan spoke about is objectivity. In carrying out public business, including making public appointments, awarding contracts, or recommending individuals for rewards and benefits, holders of public office should make choices only on objective criteria. The fourth principle is accountability. Holders of public office are accountable for their decisions and actions to the public and must submit themselves to whatever scrutiny is appropriate for their office. The fifth principle is openness. Holders of public office should be as open as possible about all the decisions and actions they take. They should give reasons for their decisions and restrict information only when the wider public interest clearly demands. The next principle that Lord Nolan laid down was honesty. And he said holders of public office have a duty to declare any private interests relating to their public duties and to take steps to resolve any conflicts arising in that way, which would have an effect in the protection of the public interest. And the final quality that Lord Nolan emphasized was leadership itself. And he said that holders of public office should promote and support these principles by leadership and example. And as a result of the Nolan recommendations, it is now compulsory for anybody seeking public office in the UK to formally subscribe to these 7 principles. So, for example, when I was appointed Law Commissioner for Northern Ireland a few years ago, I had to sign a declaration which affirmed my commitment to the Nolan principles. And if it turns out that you violate any of these principles, then of course you'd be held accountable. And one of the consequences of the Nolan principles in the UK is also that in respect of public offices, a person can only hold a maximum of 2 terms. That is probably a maximum of 8 years, 2 terms of 4 years. That also means that people don't expect to be in a certain office forever and therefore get a bit complacent or use the office for partisan interests. And of course, Lord Nolan stressed that internal systems for maintaining standards should be supported by independent scrutiny, and that more is needed to be done to promote and reinforce standards of conduct in public bodies, in particular through guidance and training, including induction training. Now, there's actually a sort of equivalent to the Nolan principles which has been around in India for a very long time. And I'm talking here about the 7 sins that Gandhi identified. I don't have the time to go into it, but as you know, you do have those very important sins which were identified as being antithetical to any activity, including public service. If you're talking about an absolute minimum essential or a list of absolute minimum essentials of integrity, then you would probably have to say that there should be a system in place to reduce opportunities for corrupt behavior, which is quite a difficult thing to do, but not impossible. Also, changing a culture to make corruption unacceptable socially. By this, I mean the system of naming and shaming. Now, that only works if people are shamed into better behavior. But it is still useful, I think, in most society. And it's all part of ethical behavior. Because the biggest sanction that you can get through ethics, through a code of ethics, is naming and shaming, rather than strict punishment. Also, making people accountable for their actions, which includes an incorruptible, efficient judiciary and other law enforcement mechanisms. Now, that is a topic on which I can speak for hours together, but I don't intend to. because it is my belief that if you do not have impartial, efficient, incorruptible law enforcement mechanisms, and also a very competent and incorruptible judiciary, you can kiss goodbye to any document, including very well drafted constitutions and laws. So very, very important. As I said, there is so much that can actually be said on that subject, but I'm not going to venture into that area because I realize I've come pretty close to the end of my time. And so I'll just wrap up with a couple of concluding observations. I would say, having said everything that I've said about the importance of institutions, processes, mechanisms, that in the end, nothing matters more than the human factor. Because you can talk about putting in place all kinds of mechanisms to ensure ethical behavior, but ultimately ethics would come from inside. So in a sense, you go back to what Gandhi said, which is the importance of the still small voice of the individual. And so to my mind, that is just as important, or perhaps more important than many of the processes. I'm not in any way suggesting that there is no room for mechanisms and processes. I'm simply saying that those mechanisms and processes will not work unless you have something coming from inside a person. And of course, it means that many of us will have to reflect deeply on the transitory nature of life and of power in office, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. We also probably need to reflect on the transitory nature of popularity, because a lot of the time our actions are guided by an impulse of becoming popular. And again, this is something which is so transitory that in the larger scheme of things, they do not matter at all. But still, that impulse is very strong among humans. So is the unpredictability of being in the good books of those whom it may be tempting to please, but whose favor may be withdrawn at very short notice. You know what I mean, in that there are many people who do things which they should not be doing, but they do it to please certain people, whether they are political masters or their own bosses or whatever. And they don't realize that the favor that they seek can be withdrawn at any time. And a lot of the time, the favor is withdrawn, at which point you realize what a heavy price you've paid, and the consequences would be that you'd be banished into oblivion or worse at very short notice. So we need to be aware of the potential for long-term good and for earning the gratitude of future generations versus the potential for long-term damage and leaving behind a dishonorable reputation. The choice ultimately is yours. In other words, every human being has the capacity, fortunately, to make that choice. And I sincerely hope that you'll all be in a position to make the right choice. I do apologize for not being an expert on this subject. I have done my best to say a few things, and I'm thankful to you for your attention. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah, sure. I'll leave that there.
That was an indeed insightful session. Thank you, sir. We will start with Q&A session now. Audience can ask their questions, and you all know the guidance for Q&A sessions. Audience with questions, please raise your hands and mics will be passed to you. Please stand up.
Sir, hello sir. A very good morning. My name is Sarot Krishna And I want to ask one question. That's what do you know about Universal Civil Code in terms of India? And my second question will be that what you have observed about Indian administration law and UK administration law, and if it has any flaw in Indian administration law, so how we can rectifying it?
Thank you for your question. Is the mic working?
It's working.
Yeah. Okay, I hope you can hear me. Or actually, I don't mind standing there if you don't mind. That's so much, the mic is definitely much better. Okay, can I give that back to you? Okay, thank you for your questions. A very good morning to you. Please do sit down. I do not intend to stand on any formality, so you're very welcome to relax while I try to answer your question. Actually, the last part of your question really makes my heart sink, because there is no way I'd be able to give you a very short answer for that in terms of the recommendations for improving administration or administrative law in India. But let me go back to the other two aspects of your question. The first was on the Uniform Civil Code, UCC. The thing with the Uniform Civil Code, first of all, is that it is a very complex subject. So anybody who pretends that it is very easy, you just pass a law, bringing in a Uniform Civil Code, I think is living in cloud cuckoo land. The reality is you're dealing with thousands of years of tradition, you're dealing with huge sensitivities. And although it is generally desirable to have common laws for everybody, there are certain aspects where I think it is better not to interfere. It is better for civil law not to interfere with customary practices. I'm not saying this as a general principle. I'm simply saying that there are certain occasions when, if you interfere with thousands of years of tradition, then you make a lot of people unhappy while achieving very little in terms of the intended objectives. Now, there are so many countries in the world where you have non-uniform application of laws. And one country with which I'm very familiar, where there is constant talk about this problem, is Malaysia. It is a country which is almost like a second home to me. Now, what happens there is they have a system of Sharia and civil law. Malaysia, as you know, is like India. It's a former British colony, and therefore Malaysia has common law, English common law. The clash between Sharia law and common law has come up so many times in Malaysia, both in the courts and outside, and it has led to all kinds of human misery. So, you can think about the advantages of a uniform civil code, but the problem is that because Sharia has been so entrenched in the majority population, any attempt to change will be traumatic and might even lead to avoidable violence. So as far as India is concerned, I would suggest that the answer might be to adopt a process of gradual reform. In other words, not to come down heavily with a law that says from tomorrow onwards, separate personal laws will cease to exist. Don't forget that separate personal laws also are favored by other communities, by communities not just the ones that you may have in mind when you talk about a uniform civil code. I will give you an example. I was in Kerala for the last 2 days, and I was struck by the number of activities which are governed by personal law, which is so specific to that part of the country. So it is something which you need to give a lot of attention to, but do it gradually. The second part of your question was about administration, and I presume you meant administrative law. And I'm happy to talk on that subject. I'm more comfortable talking on that subject than on management subjects. So I will say this, that in very essential terms, administrative law in India and in the UK are very similar. What has happened is, in terms of application, in terms of interpretation, in terms of nuance, there are some differences. Now, the single biggest observable difference between the UK system and India is, of course, legal delays. So, If you go to an Indian court, then I don't need to tell you that you can be fairly sure when you talk about a civil case that your case can go on for about 30 years or so in the High Court. Okay, now that should be considered absolutely shocking in any part of the world, and certainly in the UK. Okay, so there is that. And part of the problem, of course, it has nothing to do only with the law. The problem has to do with various other factors, which I don't have the time to go into, but on which I've given all kinds of lectures. The essential reality is that changing the law is not going to change that. But sometimes law also needs to be changed. Administrative law can be made simpler, can be made more user-friendly, and there are areas where that is possible. But in very essential terms, the situation between UK administrative law and Indian administrative law is very similar. Okay, I'm sorry that I can't answer the third part of your question, because if I did that, most of you would be extremely unhappy, partly because you wouldn't have an opportunity to ask any other question, and partly because you're going to be detained here for much longer than you would expect. Thank you.
So I'm Rachna R from 3rd Sem MBA. I have a question for you. Ethics for me is one, and ethics I want to implement in a company is another one. So how will I tackle this war between the ethics I believe and ethics which will be fruitful for the organization?
Okay, I would say first of all, by identifying overlaps or commonalities. In other words, there will still be many areas where your personal ethics are similar to the ethics that an organization wants to put in place or encourage. So don't assume that there is an inevitable conflict. I would say, generally speaking, that there is more commonality than conflict. In other words, probably 80% would be common to both your conception of ethics and the company's conception of ethics. I'm not confining my remarks because you said so to companies, to corporations. The other aspect is that you will try to persuade the leaders in the company to see your view on ethics and say, look, why don't you try to incorporate these ethics? And by and large, people are quite receptive. But if you're talking about a situation where there's a complete clash between your ethics and the company's ethics, I am afraid the only reasonable solution would be for you to change your employment and to go to another company. I'll give you a very simple example and I'll stop because I realize we are almost close to our end time. Suppose you are working for a tobacco company and your ethics do not allow you to support smoking. There is no compromise. You cannot have a compromise. So you'll simply have to agree politely and reasonably to leave the company and go somewhere else.
We will take one last question. Okay. Thank you, sir, for being so patient and answering all the questions. Now I request you to take your seat off stage. Now I request our Chancellor, sir, to talk few words on this occasion.
Good morning. I have to congratulate Professor Raghavendra, Dr. Shubha and her team selecting the right topic, particularly for me to listen. Nurturing credible administration on the pillars of ethics and legality. I think being management students, this is a very good topic than any subject or course related topic. I can say this will help a lot if you try to practice whatever Dr. Venkat Iyer spoke here. In fact, I told I will just facilitate Dr. Venkat Iyer and go leave because I have a lot of programs. But I wanted to hear when he started, I felt like sitting here and listen in total. That's why he sent message. I will be only I can attend the other meetings after 11:15. Now I am handling the REVA core team with elected about 30-40 people, and now I am giving lecture for them, preparing and coming giving lecture. This is already 10 sessions I had. Earlier I planned only 10 sessions. Already I completed 10 sessions. Looks like I require another 90 sessions definitely to at least to for them to satisfy me to certain extent, not even 50%. That is the situation I am facing. Why I am telling this subject, ethics. I told in that core team, I am always talking about 10 points, 10 words I am always continuously using from last maybe 30-40 years particularly, very seriously from last 15 years when I seriously involved in educational institute. One of them is ethics. Ethics is a very, very, very vast subject, important one for everyone. If everyone follows ethics, have ethics, I can say 75% of problems solved. No country, no individual, no state will have any problem. Before going to some of the topics which I noted already, I have noted about 15 topics. That will thank you very much, sir, because this will help for me. I think another 6 months I have topics to discuss with our team. That much of subject you gave it to me, very important one. Before going to one of the question, Dr. Venkat Iyer could not able to. He avoided. He knows what is the depth of that. I will answer to this. I will not answer. I will ask the question. You answer. You will get the answer for there. How many of you from Tamil Nadu here? Okay, right. Ours is a very dramatic, what is that? Democratic country, right? In Tamil Nadu, always two parties are ruling. Both are strong parties. They are ruling, I have seen from last 40 years at least, closely following. Because as a businessman, I have to follow what is happening in every state, what is happening in the country, even outside the country also. Tamil Nadu MPs, whether they are from ADMK or DMK, when subject comes in the parliament, that is Tamil Nadu's interest is first. They will not they will not fight in the parliament. They will become together. They will fight together when this state subject raised in the parliament or anywhere. They will go together and fight for the interest of the state. Whereas, you see, you will be reading papers or watching in TVs, there are people who are will not hesitate to demoralize our, what is that? Military people also, military officers also, who lost their service, sacrificing their lives. They are selling the country's reputation openly when they stand near the mic. Always nation first, then anything. You do politics, nothing wrong. That is why this common civil code is definitely required. I don't. You may differ, but I am telling you this is my personal this thing. Again, it is required. Then coming lot of points I have noted down. I don't want to talk about all these things. Ethics in politics, ethics in business, ethics in even for students, ethics in as a teacher one should have, as a leader one should have. Even two, three questions came about ethics, personal ethics and company ethics. Dr. Venkat Iyer correctly answered that I was observing. See, these are all. Even he spoke about the punctuality, about on taking the Japan. Sometimes I will also take Japan as how punctuality and perfection, how they practice. Because tomorrow you will become administrators. It is a very good topic you heard. You should have ethics as an administrator, business ethics, moral ethics, legal ethics, teaching ethics, ethics in politics, ethics in service, corruption. In ethics should be there in corruption also. That is, give me 2 crores, I will get it done. I will sign. Okay, we will give. They will not sign. They will make people go around like that. Earlier, say I am talking with 48 years of experience dealing with government departments and politicians, officers, everything. I have gone through all this. That is why I always speak on any subject, particularly related to many things like administration, all these things. Reason is, that is the experience I have gone through. Earlier, I am talking about, sorry if I am taking more time. See, earlier, I am talking about 30, 40 years back, people take money, that is at one point, file, they will get the file and sign. Afterwards, his secretary or her secretary should be bribed. Afterwards, now, from the 10 days from last maybe 10, 15 years, right from the attender to the minister, we have to bribe. Nobody has got control on anybody. That is the situation. Why I am telling this? You will be facing lot more than what is happening now. But nobody can touch if a clean administrator. That is there if you have ethics. As an administrator, nobody can touch. Only thing is, if it is a government job, they will transfer you, that's all. From one state to one place to one place like that. That is only the problem we have to face. Otherwise, nobody can touch. They will not have the guts also to touch. I expect who are all pursuing MBA here should become that type of administrators in the interest of the great country. This is a very good session you had really. I hope go back and again in the evening when you are free, memorize all these things, note down all the points, practice this. That will help you a lot in your career. Thank you very much, sir, for your session.
Thank you, sir, for your closing remarks. As we have come to end of our today's session, on behalf of my school, I express my gratitude for today's event. First, I would like to thank our Chancellor, sir, for creating this kind of forum. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank our speaker, Dr. Venkat Iyer, for delivering such an enlightening talk. Thank you, sir. I extend my thanks for all the faculty members of REVA Business School for their never-ending support. Thank you. Last but not the least, I thank all my fellow friends for being so attentive throughout the session. Thank you, one and all.